Welcome to the Grow Renaissance podcast. Let's nourish the world.
All right, welcome back to Pasture Prime Time, a Grow Renaissance podcast series hosted by yours truly, Neil Smith. Today, we're going to continue the growth mindset conversations that we've been having. As a lot of you know, that focus around what we do at Grow in particular is around sovereignty of data and how we better support farmers, but that translates into more confidence with the consumers, specifically on how we continue to nourish our mind, body, and soul. So today, I'm super excited to have met a new friend who's joining us on the podcast, Beth Capecchi, who also has a podcast called Never Perfect. She is a psychologist and a mental health practitioner. And we're going to be diving into conversations around what mental health really means and why nutrition is important. And so I hope that you pay attention, take some notes, and certainly we can put all the links down for Beth at the bottom of this podcast so you can reach out to her after if you have deeper dives that you'd like to get into. Well, let's get into it. Beth, thank you so much for making time this afternoon, and thanks for joining us here on Pasture Prime Time.
Thanks so much for having me. I loved talking to you a couple weeks ago and been looking forward to it.
Yeah, fantastic. So maybe I'll start with, there's a lot of things to do with mental health that sort of fall into agriculture and the agri-food market more and more readily these days. But I'd love to hear what you do on a daily routine, to really sort of work on yourself from a mental health perspective and share that. And maybe while you're doing that, you could also fill in any gaps I missed on some of the clout and knowledge base that you bring to the table.
Okay. Well, I love recommending I love your phrase, mind, body, soul, just a holistic approach to making our lives and our mental health better by, focusing on all the aspects of ourselves like movement and nutrition and social connectedness and sleep and, all those things, sense of purpose and community. And I have some little fun things I can talk about how I've sort of supported farmers in a small way, I'd like to say. But yeah, I have some really good habits and I have some medium habits and I have some bad habits, but I do a lot of early morning yoga at 6 a.m., usually 4 days a week. And this morning at 6 a.m. I did it, and that it's wonderful. And I attach on some coffee with a couple of good friends after that a lot, which just kind of reminds me of that book called Atomic Habits. If the listeners haven't heard it, it's just a neat way to add something easy to your schedule where, it's usually 2 or 3, sometimes 5 of us that do coffee right next door almost to the yoga studio. And then it's just like this nice option to have community if anyone's available, and if anyone's not, it's fine. So, but by the time 8 o'clock has rolled around, I've already gotten some exercise and some social community, and I call it free counseling because I'm very open and vulnerable with all my friends. And sometimes they'll go, "Oh, I feel guilty for using you as a sounding ear." And I'm like, I use my friends for that all the time. Just because I'm a psychologist doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to me like you would any good friend. So,
Right.
and I try to eat healthy. I'm not great on it, but I do try to just, I have a really good episode I did on nutrition. I've done some on blood sugar and things like that, where I'm not like the expert, but I'm interviewing experts or quoting. I think I told you about the Blood Sugar Goddess or the Glucose Revolution book when we talked. So I really love telling clients some of these things that I've just learned, and they know I'm not an expert in those things, but I just try to live, a lot of these things that I preach. So yeah, those are some of my really good habits. And then I try to get better. I have ADHD. That's a good thing to tell the listeners. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I do have the hyper part. And some people only have the inattention, but so I'm not the most routine structured person, but I do try to, do the best I can with the limitations that I have.
I love it. I have dyslexic thinking. That's how I use to phrase it because I see things usually a little bit different, as they are written or in front of me. It takes me a moment or two to process, but it's allowed me to really interpret things differently from maybe my colleagues, my friends, or family, and be a bit creative with that, and allowed me to stand out as a bit of a black sheep. But it's become a bit of my superpower, as some of these terms are for us humans. Now you
Love
mentioned,
that.
and I love that. Yeah, thank you. You mentioned good habits. So I always think like mental health, and unfortunately, those that have been listening to me and those that see my presentations, they know that I put this stat out here often that there's every 10 days, there's a farmer that unfortunately is no longer with us because of suicide.
Oh,
Agriculture's got one of the largest suicide rates and continues to escalate because of all those external factors that we've set up. And so it's up to us to help fix that because we've created the problem, we can help fix the problem. And it starts with conversation, but in that conversation, it's about growth. And I look at growth as being messy the same way I look at a farm field. Ecology is messy. It's not meant to look pristine. But you mentioned something really important there, which is movement. Movement doesn't have to look a certain way. It could be
mm,
exercise, could be just getting out to yoga, it could be just walking and meeting friends. Socialization is very important. And then the food, you talked about doing some nutrition there. And I'd love to touch on two topics. One of the things on food right now, it's a superfood that I'm spending a lot of time talking to people about. Magnesium, foods that have magnesium in particular. Bananas,
yeah.
dark chocolate, avocado. And what does that mean for sleep, rest, and
Mm.
recovery? What does that mean for early morning activity? So let's break that down a little bit. Let's start with the pieces around movement there. And, what do you see on how that changes people's perspective when they are more active on a regular basis in a habit forming way, not just because the cows are loose and they got to run out and get them, but because they
Yeah.
intentionally, it's purposeful movement. How does that change
Yes.
people's mood, behavior?
Ooh, yeah. I often get people to listen to this YouTube video with I want to say a neuroscientist, but I'm not sure. But her name is Wendy Suzuki, and she has a little 13-minute TED talk called The Brain Changing Benefits of Exercise. And she talks about her own depression and how I don't remember the backstory in terms of, I think her doctor, somebody said, you need to exercise. And she started exercising, and her depression just started alleviating. And she was like, I'm going to do some research into the neuroscience behind like why does this help so much. So I can't remember your original question, but when you think about, and you as a farmer, it's kind of preaching to the choir, although I guess not all farmers have to be actively out there weeding and tilling, like in the old days. But the movement that people used to have back when we lived off the earth more, and all the grounding and the science of earthing. And I feel like so many people are just nature deprived and they don't realize how much radiation they have going through them. But so grounding and earthing is so important. I like that earthing documentary. But the movement, I'm a big person who, if I know why, it helps me follow rules better. So, back in the day, if I would get an injury and I'd be like, they say, ice it, ice it, ice it. I'd be like, what does icing do? Like nobody ever
Right.
explained it and I never searched it up. But when I learned that it helps with inflammation and all the different things, I'm like, okay, it reduces inflammation, and I'm sure there's other things, but I'm like, okay, that makes me more likely to do it. In the same way that movement, I think when you realize we don't get the movement we used to when there were less cars and trains and subways and buses, and people were living off the earth and hunting and washing their clothes by hand and earthing in the streams, and so but the movement, even a client of mine who has diabetes type 2, I believe, I was talking to him about some of what I learned from Jesse and Chosby with, the not eating sugar before you eat like vegetables or protein. And he was like, in all my years, I mean, he's about 70, he said, I've never had a doctor tell me that. Or the fact that if you exercise right after you eat for even 10 minutes, you take a walk, your glucose goes into your muscles. And so the bigger muscles like your quadriceps or your butt muscles, it's like it can really help. And also the oxygenated air. I think that's one thing Wendy Suzuki talks about is that freshly oxygenated air that, I'm sorry, blood. It's just so good to cleanse our vessels and make our bodies and brains feel more alive.
Absolutely. It's almost a reset, almost, you're sort of
Yeah.
that, what do
Yeah.
they
And I
call that?
try to,
Lymphatic draining, that reset of the
yeah.
limbs. Yeah.
Yeah, I really want to learn more into lymphatic drainage and stuff, even just jumping on a little trampoline. I don't know a lot about it, but I have heard like even brushing your skin in the shower or using soap causes, helps with that. I really don't know much about that, but I am actually intrigued. But and then you asked about exercise and then nutrition. Did I
Yeah.
maybe?
So I'd love to talk a little bit. I mean, you did an episode on nutrition, and of course, Grow is all about nutrition and nourishing the body. And I'm always fascinated with practitioners like yourself that, you know, pay attention to nutrition, or at least talking about it. I talk in it from a very, dissect, and I spend a lot of time figuring out, what I eat and how it helps me. But I see that with my
Yes.
family as well. Foods that have less processing and less chemistry in them, whole foods. But you can get
Mhm.
beyond that. You can get super technical on, what am I eating today? And as I mentioned, the one food that or the one element that I'm really paying attention to in my foods is magnesium, specifically around sleep. I have fairly poor sleep habits, and so I try to really figure out magnesium. But curious what you pay attention to and what's important to you as it relates to nutrition.
Yeah, that's great. And I will later remind me to like tell y'all the title of one of my podcasts called Life Changing Habits, where I kind of give an overview of these 6 habits that I created an acronym for that includes nutrition. But I'm really glad you brought me back to magnesium. So for a while, I had this little running thing at the beginning of my podcast that said, hey, it's like October. This is seasonal depression really starts to kick in, at least in this part of the world, where winter starts around October, November, and then goes till March. So vitamin D3, obviously for mood and immune system, and then vitamin B12 for energy and metabolism, and then magnesium was on the list. And I didn't know until recently, you may know better than I do, but I think there's 16 or more types of magnesium. I can't even remember how many there are. But one of my friends said magnesium glycinate is one of the really important ones for sleep, but I haven't done a deep dive into all the types. And it also helps people get more regular with their bowel like stuff. And then the last one is omega 3s like fish oil. But I've watched over the years psychiatric providers saying these are 4 of the really important supplements that affect our mental health. So, and sleep, like magnesium, that's, some people spray it on their body. I'm sure you've seen the magnesium sprays or
Totally,
lotions.
totally. Well, it's in salts too. Like Epsom salt is a magnesium sulfate, right?
Well, I
So
didn't know that.
yeah, yeah. So you can have bath, magnesium L-theranite, is another form of that. I think there's about 8 that I'm aware of, and there certainly probably is more. And as you start thinking about the multi-element factors as it gets into that, but
Hmm.
for brain cognition, that I'm probably saying it wrong, but the L-theranate, I believe it's L-theranate, magnesium L-theranate, or MLT as I call it, is
Yeah.
yeah, really, really good for brain
Wow.
cognition. And if you can find that in foods, it's even better, though it's a bit pricier because it's harder to find.
Mm.
And so when you're working with, well, first of all, let's go back. You said you helped farmers. I'd love to hear that story. Let's
Oh,
pull
you're
that out.
sweet. Well, I should say, I don't think this is going to be anything really impressive, but I do think it will show that my heart's in the right place and I do what I can when I can. During COVID, I found out there was a farmer that I met at a farmer's market and I was buying mostly eggs from him. But during COVID, when everything shut down, he had all these amazing free range eggs and the chickens were eating elderberries all the time. I'm like, well, it doesn't get much better than this. I mean, there were like
Mhm.
bramble bushes everywhere. But so I was, I knew he's made a comment like, it's going to be hard for me to make it through right now without being able to make money off these eggs. And so I arranged my neighborhood. We have, kind of a 4-block neighborhood, and I got neighbors to sign up, and I was like selling 20 dozen eggs a week for him in our neighborhood. And
Wow.
so we did that for like 2 years, and then things kind of got back to normal. But and then I also had this organic farmer that lives a while away. I mean, a little ways away, like 45 minutes or an hour away. And so I was buying stuff from him and trying to spread the word, him and his wife and our neighbors. And then also, kind of near the COVID time, he just brought a huge amount of stuff, and we had it at one of my neighbors with a big porch, and it was just bell peppers and onions and lettuce and tomatoes and just a huge amount. And so a bunch of neighbors came, and it was fun for us to have community that way. People were drinking wine, and I think someone had snacks. And, he sold a bunch of his produce that was kind of going bad during, a time where there were no farmers markets. I think that might have been 2021. And I've done a few of the I forget what you call the bags of, like, the weekly bags where you get a bag of groceries every week, the co-op maybe. Anyway,
Yeah.
I just love doing anything like that. Not only just cuz it's fun, but I love supporting local food.
I love
And
that
there's a
as well.
local grocery. Yeah, called Gaining Ground. Yeah. It's a nonprofit, but here in Chattanooga.
Well, you heard it to audience directly from Beth. Support local farmers. Not that I don't say that enough, but now you've heard it from Beth. So get out there and talk to them and really start paying attention to what they have. Funnily enough, eggs are getting a big controversy in the news right now.
Heard a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of chatter just around the labeling or the mislabeling of eggs, organic or grass fed. However, just like a lot, like livestock in particular, or any animal husbandry that is going on, it's the source of the nutrition that they eat that then goes into what we eat. And so you really have to start tracing that back. And so when you're talking to your farmers, asking them, when you say grass fed, how are you growing your grass? Like because are you spraying it with chemistry and then cutting it? Great, they might be eating grass fed, but it might be full of chemistry. And so those eggs, are full of chemistry. And so anyway, the big controversy is there's some fairly large egg producers trying to feed the population, coding a more sustainable egg, and yet their source feed is actually highly chemistried corn and cornmeal.
Uh-huh.
And then we ingest that. Yeah.
That's a good reminder. But yeah, going back to nutrition, I think keeping things simple, especially for someone like me that has ADHD, and I can get overwhelmed if it feels like a really complicated recommendation related to eating healthy. So keeping some basic rules simple, like the order that you eat things, with which Jessie and Chowsby, the glucose goddess, talks a lot about that related to blood sugar. My friend Ellie Poloskate was on my episode called 10 Steps or 10 Tips for Better Nutrition. And she talks about keeping the colors of the rainbow as much as you can on your plate. And I just think a lot of people don't think about that. Like, if every day you're having chicken and potatoes, or chicken and macaroni and cheese, like, if you could add some green beans or carrots or sweet potatoes, or kale or purple vegetables, yellow vegetables, just all those minerals that we are missing. And I'm very intrigued by soil science, even though I don't know a ton about it, but just the quality of the soil matters so much for the minerals. And you know a lot about seeds and all that stuff, right?
I do. I mean, soil science is right up our alley. And Um, I love that you talked about grounding, because a lot of what we talk about, from the mental health side, is get out there and really start to pay attention to the soils. It's the activity, but it does. I mean, the energy and frequency and the grounding that happens in getting your hands into the dirt and really understanding. But soil structure is very important. And then, the pedigree seed in particular, which is just a non-manipulated seed at the end of the day. Heirloom seeds are kind of the same. Seed saving is very important. Like, if you're doing backyard growing, if you're growing tomatoes or cucumbers, save the seeds and then start planting them again next year. And avocados the same. The big pit, you can actually put two toothpicks in it and set it in some water and let it repopulate, and soon you'll have your own little avocado tree inside your house. You need a lot of
So
sunlight.
cool.
But these are the
Love that.
simple things that we can do to continue to get nutritious food, where we actually know what's gone into it.
Yes.
On the other side of that, for everyday consumers, I talk about, changing one habit a day at the grocery store, or every time you go, not necessarily a day, but every time you go, just try one new thing. And if that's paying attention to the labels, if that's buying a product that is a bit more nutritious, if that's, sourcing vegetables that come directly from farms in your local area, try that 100-mile diet. Those are the things that will start to make a difference, and you'll start to see a little bit of a change physiologically, metabolically, and then we just compound on top of that. And that's kind of how farming is, right? You pay attention, you observe, and then you replicate what's good, and you start ditching what isn't.
I love that. That's so good. Yeah, just do one thing different or buy something new, try something new. It's just not to make it overwhelming. And, I like to sometimes say to people like food doesn't have to be delicious. It can be, but sometimes it's more of a practical thing. And so I'll just tell people whether they're college students or they're 70-year-olds, I'm like, if you could even just grab a raw piece of broccoli or spinach and just eat it just to get it down, before you eat something else, or don't eat dessert by itself because it's going to jack up your blood sugar. And, just these simple things that, and like you said, try new foods and give things second chances. Because, I mean, you can have the most amazing Brussels sprout in the world, and then you can have terrible overcooked Brussels sprouts, and you think, I don't like them, but it depends on how they're prepared.
Yeah. That reminds me of growing up. I used to go to my uncle's place, and my aunt used to make this dessert called aspic. It was tomato pie. Do you remember
I've
aspic?
heard of tomato aspic. Yeah, I've had it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Not the best.
the worst thing ever.
The
Um,
texture, yeah.
yeah. I actually love it now. It's kind of like
Do
sardines.
you?
It's funny how your taste changes, but I think it's
Yeah.
fantastic.
It's
Yeah.
like V8 juice in a gelatin form, but better.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
That's funny. Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like if you have to plug your nose, I mean, I don't love beets, but I like beets. Now, well, I'm not going to go into that. I was about to say something. I'll just say this. One time I bought beet hummus and I ate too much of it. And I won't say what happened, but I got alarmed and thought there was something wrong with me, and there wasn't. But if you eat too many beets, it can cause like false alarm in your bathroom scenario.
Duly noted on that. Cut down
Yeah.
some beats. Yeah. Well, Beth, I'd love to hear a little bit about Never Perfect, your podcast, and I'd love for you to share with the audience, what's it about, and where can people find you, and what are
Yeah.
some of the things, upcoming episodes that you have?
Good questions. Well, so if you Google Never Perfect Dr. Beth, it will show up on, all kinds of podcast platforms. I mean, Apple, Spotify. You can also find it all at neverperfect.org. And my podcast is all over the place. It's almost 5 years ago. And the topics, as you were talking, I'm like, I've got an episode on understanding suicide. I've got an episode on healing after suicide. And it's just heartbreaking to hear that farmers suicide rates are hard. That, I mean, so high. That's just, and I've heard that about veterinarians and just different careers. It's just really heartbreaking. And that's why a big part of my episode, or my goal in all the episodes, is to help people know they're not alone. They're in it together. We need each other. We need to be vulnerable. I almost called the podcast a lot of things. One of them was struggling through. My husband's like, that sounds like kind of negative. Life is hard. I mean, life is beautiful and amazing, but life is hard.
Yeah.
And if we're not vulnerable and we don't find people to band together, be it farmers talking to other farmers and just saying, I'm struggling, or people in their marriages, or people as parents, or people just feeling like failures. I mean, we all have so many struggles and disappointments and grief, and we too hard on ourselves sometimes. And if we start sharing all that, we can realize like we're not alone, and you don't have to feel hopeless, because a lot of our problems are universal, and half the people we pass that might look like they're fine are not. And but somebody has to be brave enough and vulnerable enough to start those conversations. I know Brene Brown is a very famous podcaster that some of your listeners might know, and she had a very famous TED Talk years ago called The Power of Vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, maybe a lot of traditional strong men, and I know there's some amazing female farmers as well. So I don't want to stereotype the gender of
Yeah.
farmers, but the strong silent type, and they think it's weak to cry or weak to talk about struggles. But I think it's actually the opposite. It's really brave because it's vulnerable and it's not comfortable. But most people are so glad when they open up, and so relieved when others open up and share their story. So anyway, I got off on a tangent, but I have a lot of like running themes, and if you can't tell, I'm very passionate about it. But just, trying to get people to find their strengths, find their weaknesses. I love what you said about your dyslexia. Like some people would walk around going, I have ADHD, I have dyslexia, I don't want anyone to know. And it's like, why? You know,
Mhm.
I mean, I understand why. It's not like I don't understand why some people feel that way, but it's like, it's so common and there's so many strengths. I just told my client that I met with at 8 o'clock this morning, I said, he thinks he has ADD and he's more like 60 years old. And I was just saying, I wouldn't trade my ADD in. I mean, there's so many superpowers that I love. There are definitely some struggles, but so that really resonated when you said I'm dyslexic, and a lot of people that are dyslexic make great entrepreneurs and great architects. I mean, you could Google it. There's a lot of others. Those are two. My husband thinks he's dyslexic, and I think he probably is. I have an episode on dyslexia.
There we go.
Yeah, there's a woman named Sasha Saidman, I think Saidman, that wrote a book about dyslexia, and she has it. I think it's a children's book, but it's really nice. But yeah, I just want people to have the healthiest life they can and to know their strengths and their weaknesses and their package deal. I call it developing a user's manual to yourself. And I did a podcast recently with someone else in the network, Dr. Mamta Bhatt, and I have my own favorite analogies, but she taught me some new ones. One of my favorite analogies that she also likes is the flower one, how every flower is beautiful. You don't need to say that the rose is prettier than the lily is prettier than the Gerber daisy, or, but she was saying that it's like a symphony and we are all instruments and we need all the instruments with their own unique sounds and offerings to make this beautiful blending. So, but yeah, if going back to that, if people want to look up, Never Perfect, you can also like search Never Perfect Depression and it'll probably pop up an episode, or Never Perfect Suicide, Never Perfect Nutrition. The life-changing habits is probably one of the most relevant to what you're doing, because that's my little acronym that spends, like spending time or spending money. So just
Right.
focusing on sleep, productivity, purpose, exercise, nutrition, downtime, hobbies, relaxation, and social support.
I love it. I love
Those
it.
are the six. Yeah.
Spend acronym.
Spins. Yeah.
So
Spins with an S.
spins with an S. That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Social. Yeah.
And one more thing I forgot to say. Now that podcast is almost 5 years old. I also have a faith podcast for those who are not offended by Christian faith. It's just also called Never Perfect Faith, and you can find it on my website. But I just get a lot of, joy and peace from my faith, and so that's why a couple of years ago I decided to start a faith podcast as well. So
I love it. Reminds me, actually, I just saw something or read it. I can't remember if I saw it or read it. But it was this lady, she was giving a presentation and she was about 6'4", 6'5". She had a very deep voice. And, she said when she started speaking, people, questioned her about, the tone of her voice. It's very, very like baritone. And yet she said everyone paid attention and listened. And so that was her superpower. And then she was talking about her best friend who's 4'3", and her friend that was 4'3" had always sort of looked up to this larger
no pun
person.
intended. Uh-huh.
Yeah, no pun intended. But she got in a car crash and they needed to use the jaws of life to get her out. And the medical professionals or the fire brigades that used the jaws of life said, if you were 2 inches taller, we wouldn't be talking to you right now. And so it really makes me think, when you think about Never Perfect and that symphony of flowers, that we really need to be, made up of all these different individuals that all have these unique skill sets and heights and tones and functionality.
Yeah.
And that's really the diversity that, aligns us as much as it divides us sometimes. It really does align us.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Yeah, like so many people spend their lives like doubting themselves, devaluing their package deal of what they have to offer. Like, I'm too tall, I'm too short. That person's smarter than that. I mean, I can go off on a tangent on that. I'm like, do not say that people are smarter than you, because there's 9 types of intelligence that have been clearly defined by Gardner, if you want to look that up. But there's just countless of little other domains related, and naturalistic intelligence is one that most farmers, I'm sure, have. But then there's all these other ones that just superpowers that people have that are needed, so that aren't as easy to measure in an intelligence. But it really makes me sad. And I'm like, you're wrong. Like, if people say, oh, they're smarter, so many people go through life with imposter syndrome thinking they're not as smart. And I'm like, you're wrong. And then success can be measured very differently depending on what you think success looks like.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Well, I think that summary of what you've just said is live in love and appreciate people through empathy. That sort of is a statement that sort of summarizes all of that together. Live in love, appreciate people through empathy. I like that.
Yeah,
I just came up
love
with
it.
that.
That's a good job. Are you AI? Is that your side job as AI? I'm kidding.
No AI. Yeah, no AI here. You know what? And funny, it's AI and agriculture, at least for me in the cattle industry, is a very different acronym, artificial insemination. And so
Right.
I laugh a lot because people use AI now like a ubiquitous term for this artificial intelligence. And I'm going, if you only knew what the other version of that was.
That reminds me, when I talked to you 2 weeks ago, you were sharing something. You're like, I hope you don't have a weak stomach. And you were telling me a story I never got to tell you. My grandfather had a farm in Georgia, and my uncle helped him all the time. And one time when I was probably 12, this cow had had a baby, and then the sack, I guess the whatever you call the sack, was still in there. And so I watched my uncle have to stick his arm like all the way up and pull out the sack. And it didn't gross me out. I mean, I'm sure I was like, ooh, but I don't have a weak stomach that way. So, but yeah, I had a little experience with cows growing up because my grandfather's farm.
There you go. I love it. I love it. Yeah, it's always the greenhorn thing we do. We bring people in, and after a cow gives birth, sometimes you have to check to see if there's twins, if the other one came out, or if and it's an experience for a lot of people that haven't experienced that.
Yeah.
So yeah, very very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Beth, I really appreciate you taking the time. For all our audience listening, please make sure you check out Never Perfect podcast. Again, we'll leave information below or above, depending on where you're listening or watching this. And you can reach out directly to Beth if you've got questions around mental health or her SPENS acronym, or just looking for somebody to talk to. I think it would be great opportunity to engage with somebody. Beth and I, by the way, are part of this newer networking group, and it's been tremendous. We're getting to meet each other and some other very head and heart aligned individuals.
Totally. It's an
So thanks for
amazing
your time.
network. Thank you, Neil, and thank you and to all the farmers and you for everything you do for this world. And I'm like totally behind anything I can do to help support y'all in some way. I will do it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We'll catch you next time,
Thank you.
everyone, on Pasture Prime Time. Ciao.